For example, one of the demands was that permission be given for the broadcast of Kirtan hymns from the Golden Temple to Sikhs living abroad, particularly in Europe and North America. The Sikhs were willing to fund the venture themselves, so it should have been just a matter of allocating a suitable transmission frequency. As in other matters, permission from Delhi was not forthcoming. Another grievance concerned the fact that Sikhs had been wrongly categorized as Hindus in the Indian constitution. To change this should have been just a technical matter from the national viewpoint, but one which would have gone some way in restoring the shattered confidence of the Sikhs in the goodwill of the Indian government. Similarly, according sacred city status to Amritsar, another of the demands, should have been just a routine matter. After all, Hindu holy cities like Benares and Kurukshetra already had this status. But alas, the government considered it unacceptable to concede to even these and other minor demands, requests seemingly trivial to the non-Sikh. As we have seen, the demands of the agitation were in no way radical or extreme, but rather they were simply a consequence of the failure of successive Indian governments to implement pre-independence pledges. Indeed, for the Sikhs, the Anandpur Resolution was not a list of demands, but a charter of rights. However, it is worth emphasizing that most of the Sikh demands weren't Sikh demands at all, but were regional demands. The conflict was not between Sikhs and Hindus, but between Punjab, which is over 40% Hindu, and Delhi. Given the sacrifices that the Sikhs had made for independence, the resolution was not only an affront to these sacrifices, but also is indicative of the type of relation that the Sikhs have had with the centre. A rundown of what the Sikh contribution to independence was is amply illustrated by the following figures, which are provided by the late Maulana Abu Azad, president of the Congress Party at the time of independence, and relate independence-related sacrifices. Out of 2,125 martyrs, 1,550 were Sikhs. Out of 2,646 exiled to the Andaman Islands, 2,147 were Sikhs. Out of 127 Indians sent to the gallows, 92 of them were Sikhs. The Sikhs made the overwhelming majority of the sacrifices, even though they formed just over 2% of the population, and it is hardly surprising that Sikhs dominated the civil rights movement in Punjab, a state where they formed just a little over half the population. The agitation. The Civil Rights Campaign, or Morcha, was officially launched by the Sikh political party, the Akali Dal, in Punjab on August 4, 1982. In accordance with Sikh principles, this movement was a peaceful one demanding the implementation of the Anandpur Resolution. The agitation took the form of demonstrations and strikes, which were entirely peaceful. During the 2 years of this campaign, over 200,000 Sikhs courted arrest, about 3 times the number arrested in the whole of the Quit India movement. At the end of May 1984, the Sikh leadership decided to step up its campaign and announced tentative plans to withhold the shipment of grain from the state. The government reacted swiftly by completely sealing off the state and moving in the army on a massive scale. Despite the ejection of all foreign correspondents from Punjab, the horrifying scale on which Sikh men, women and children were then butchered and the devastation of virtually all their historic shrines in the state has become all too apparent. To justify its actions, the Indian government accused the Sikhs of forming a coalition to secede from India and form a separate state, Khalistan. It also claimed that extremists and terrorists under the leadership of Bhindranwale had taken over the Golden Temple. It repeatedly pointed to the fact that about 300 people had been killed in the state over 2 years. Let us examine these claims and accusations. The demands of the agitation made no mention of Khalistan. On numerous occasions, the leaders of the agitation categorically stated that they wished to remain an integral part of India. In fact, Bhindranwale's own reaction to the notion of Khalistan was one of perplexed astonishment. I feel that I should make clear my position on the issue of Khalistan before the Sangat congregation. I did not want to say anything on this matter because it is not an issue that concerns our Morcha. However, due to persistent questioning, I think I should mention it briefly. Hell, my position is quite simple. I'm neither for nor against Khalistan. That is to say, we are not asking for Khalistan. It is not our demand. However, if the government feels that it cannot accommodate our just aspirations within India and offers us a separate homeland, then we will not refuse it, as we did in 1947. It was almost certainly some elements in the government who mischievously introduced the notion of Khalistan in the context of the agitation. Essentially, it was an alarmist tactic used to discredit the agitation and propagate the myth that Punjab was full of Sikh separatists. I know it had this effect on me personally. My reaction on reading the newspapers was, "Who are these lunatics wanting Khalistan?" Fortunately, I was in a position to discover the truth of the matter. However, most people have to rely entirely on the media, and there seems little doubt that this scare propaganda was effective in generating anti-Sikh feelings in India. The Sikhs in general, and Bhindranwale in particular, were held responsible for the lawlessness in the state. This conclusion was based on purely circumstantial evidence, namely, the erroneous assumption that an armed Sikh implied a terrorist or an extremist. Leaving aside Sikh principles for the moment, even the bare facts of the situation refute the government's allegations. For example, Swami, an MP from Bombay who visited the Golden Temple in late April 1984, noted some disturbing inconsistencies. As a 3-day resident at the Golden Temple, I was not in a position to ascertain if criminals were hiding in the temple complex. I cannot recognize any of them. The government keeps saying that criminals are hiding in the temple area. Only once, about a year and a half ago, the government sent a list of 40 criminals to SGPC. On examination, the SGPC found that 18 of them just could not be in the Golden Temple. Some were in Pakistani jails for hijacking, some were in Canada and West Germany, and by the government's own admission in Parliament, 2 were dead. The remaining 22 could not be located inside the temple by the SGPC screening committee, since the particulars provided by the government were too vague. Later, in the Lok Sabha, the Home Minister, P.C. Sethi, admitted these facts. Since then, no further lists have been sent to the SGPC, and yet the government keeps declaring that criminals are hiding in the temple complex. I am also amazed to read newspaper reports of criminals walking in and out of the temple campus undetected. The Golden Temple complex and its exits are surrounded by the Central Reserve Police Force, the Border Security Force, and the Punjab Police. In addition, RAW, IB, and state CID agents who, in plain clothes, swarm the precincts of the temple, yet proclaim offenders stroll in and out of the temple complex. How can this be? Indeed, how could it be that the Sikhs could allow their most sacred shrine to be used as a terrorist camp? The question is absurd. If there had been a shred of evidence that Bhindranwale and his group were terrorists, they would have been immediately thrown out of the Golden Temple complex by the Sikhs. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was a religious preacher and the head of a highly respected missionary centre, the Damdami Taksal. This Taksal was set up by Guru Gobind Singh, who appointed Baba Deep Singh to lead this centre in 1708. However, this Taksal fell back into relative obscurity until it was headed by Sant Gurbachan Singh in the mid-1950s. Gurbachan Singh was a very learned scholar and returned the Damdama Taksal to the forefront of Sikhism. As Sant Gurbachan Singh lived at Bindar, this Taksal became associated with this village. Jarnail Singh grew up at this Taksal and obtained his religious training from Sant Gurbachan Singh. In 1977, he was selected to lead this Taksal, and consequently he too was associated with the name of Bindar and became known as Bhindranwale. Sant Jarnail Singh vigorously pursued his duties as a missionary and went from village to village preaching about Sikhism. He was a powerful speaker and became successful in his endeavours. However, his success was resented by fundamentalist Hindu organizations in the Punjab, such as the Arya Samaj. He was harassed by these groups to the extent that his fellow missionaries were beaten up, their transport set alight, and even copies of the Sikh scriptures they carried were torn and burned. He became increasingly aware of the injustice of broken promises in Punjab and the widespread discrimination against the Sikhs, and started to speak out against this. In fact, it was Bhindranwale who initiated the peaceful agitation in Punjab on July 20th, 1982. Every day, 51 members of his group would go out on demonstrations and court arrest. Later, when the Akali Dal decided to take up the cause and launched its statewide campaign, Bhindranwale terminated his demonstrations and backed the Akali Morcha for the implementation of the Anandpur Resolution. It is often said that Bhindranwale was a creation of Mrs. Gandhi, which went wrong. She supported him when her opponents were in power, but he became a nuisance when she was returned to office. There may well have been a change of heart on her part, but as far as Bhindranwale was concerned, his duty as a Sikh was to speak out against injustice. This he did, irrespective of who was in power.